1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is! He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called J.J. Meets World.
Have you ever been a part of something that you thought was profound, that you thought was life-changing, and more importantly, more specifically, it was life-changing for someone other than yourself? Let me give you a scenario. A few months ago, a movie called Love, Simon came out, and it's not the greatest movie in the world, but what makes it unique in that it's a romantic comedy about a high school student who is dealing with coming out of the closet and the strength that it takes to tell those people around you, because you might be afraid. You might be afraid of their reaction. You might be afraid of even their inaction. And so I saw this movie and it really touched me. And I thought it was amazing to watch an entire crowd of strangers cheer at the end of the movie when something awesome happens. I'm not going to ruin it for you because you guys will probably want to pick it up. So I thought to myself, this is important. This is important because there are so many people out there who have sat through romantic comedies that don't represent them, and it doesn't represent the struggle of love that they have had to journey through. So I got the line benders together and we said, we're going to buy out a screening of this movie and we'll have free tickets available. So whoever wants to can come to it. So we buy out a theater and so many people showed up. So many people were lined up hours in advance to get one of these free tickets that we bought out a second screen almost immediately. And the people at Marcus Theaters were awesome about it. And they gave me a group discount rate. Even when I said, hey, listen, what's a possibility? They moved one screening into another theater so it could accommodate more people. It was just, it was awesome. And so the first movie started, I want to say at like 7:40, and the second one started at 8:10. So I ended up sitting in the 8:10 because I had to get everything started for the 7:40, and it was packed. I mean, there were no seats left. And I hopped out so that I could be there at the end of the first screening. And the same thing happened when I saw it, which is people started cheering for this character. And a lot of people left and they were crying. They were crying with the excitement and they were crying with the experience that they just had. And a lot of people were thanking me for it. And it's nothing to thank me for. All I'm doing is giving you an opportunity to see something that you could see on your own. But I was really proud of the moment that I said I was able to give these people a group experience that they could be a part of. And so the first screening everyone files out. And so I went over to the other one and I caught it at the exact same moment I had popped into the other one. So another full theater full of people screaming and cheering and, so excited and so happy. And the whole theater, same thing. People are coming out and they're saying thanks. And just, this was so much fun. And it was so neat to see this movie. And there was one young man who stayed back, and he kind of had been sort of bobbing and weaving around me, and I was waiting to leave, and I could tell that he wanted to talk to somebody before he left. And so the last person leaves, and this gentleman approaches me, and he's crying, and he shakes my hand and he goes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have never felt safer and I have never felt more accepted than I have being in this movie, watching a gay character get applause and excitement for him to find love. And I said, well, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted people to be able to see that, just because Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks have it down to an art doesn't mean that that's the only thing you should see romantic comedy wise. And we stayed back and we chatted for another 25 minutes. And I never even asked him what his name was. He never asked what my name was. And we just we had this just conversation about how important this was to him. And even though, like I said, the movie's not amazing, it's a good renter. I doubt a ton of people are going to have this in their collection, but it had a profound impact on this young man. And I got to be a part of that. And I will never forget that. I will never forget the moment that he came up and shook my hand that turned into a hug, and knowing that I had been a part of something that meant something so deeply to another human being. The closest thing I can even think of with that would be someone who's a teacher, a teacher who has this profound impact. And this is, they talk about how people can be molded like clay a little bit, and who help set the mold of who you're going to be. It's a person who, it's not a family member. You're not forced to be around them. You're not related to them by the luck of the genetic blood draw. Yeah. This is somebody who just is in the world with you, that you connect with for that moment. Have you ever had anything like that?
As you were talking, I've been trying to think about something that would maybe be as profound as that. I off the top of my head, I can't think of a particular instance. It did remind me of a time when I was a kid. It was during my dad's second marriage, and we were going to this Methodist church in North Fargo. And I remember us one Sunday, the service was going on, and there was a guy who was standing in the pew behind us. And after everything was done, and we kind of file out, and as I'm about to leave, I look around and I see that my dad is still back there where we were all just sitting, and he's talking to this guy, and he has his hand on this guy's back, and this guy is crying. I didn't know him. We didn't know who the dude was. And Dad talked to him for a few minutes, and then we left, and I said, Dad, who was he? And he goes, I don't know. I don't know his name, but he looked like he needed someone to talk to. So I spoke to him for a few minutes, and he's having a really hard time. He's going through XYZ. And that was a really stellar example from my father. Both of my parents, the biggest takeaway from my childhood that my parents taught me is that compassion costs you nothing. And it's probably the most important thing that you could give to anyone at any given time. So I wish I could have had another story like yours off the top of my head, but I've been in moments too where I've been moved by the action of others. There's a local bank in town here that does a pay it forward program. They've been doing it for the past 10 years. And I've been lucky to edit some of the videos that they make about this program from time to time. And boy, there's nothing that makes you want to give more than seeing other people give and see how it affects their life.
Oh, that is absolutely the truth, isn't it? When you're telling that story about your dad, it reminded me of at my dad's funeral. I was 19 years old when my dad passed away from cancer, and we had the funeral at the Presbyterian Church in downtown Fargo. Beautiful Gothic church, stained glass, stone everywhere. And the funeral ended with a lone bagpiper playing Amazing Grace and marching out of the cathedral. And I was the first person behind him. My mom and my sister were right behind me, but they were hugging each other. And so I had this enormously long, powerful walk listening to Amazing Grace on the bagpipes. And in that particular church, like even right now, like I'm getting a little, you get worked up from it, right? Yeah. You feel the power of it. And I got almost to the very end before somebody reached out and kind of gave me a little pat on the back. And I remember it was Steve Stark, who everyone knows Steve Stark in this community. If you don't, he's a cartoonist. He's a humorist. He's an amazing actor.
Does a great Teddy Roosevelt.
Amazing Teddy Roosevelt. He's Mr. History. He does all these. We got to get him on the podcast. He'd be a fun one. But Steve reached out and kind of patted me on the back. And it's not that everyone else chose not to pat me on the back, but you don't know what to do when you're seeing something like that. And do you stop and try and pull me in? No, that's not, the way it's supposed to be. But that moment that was the compassion that someone needed. And it gave me the strength to get to the end of the pews and walk out the back door.
It's too bad that these transcendent moments that we feel seem to require tragedy for us to feel them more often than not. So the Love Simon thing, right? Not that movie's a tragedy or anything like that, but having to have a situation like that is because of the tragedy of gay teens whose parents reject them, or who are at school and they get bullied on. They get bullied because of their sexuality.
Yep, having to spend the bulk of their youth with a secret.
Right. And so because those tragedies happen, that set the stage for this really beautiful moment for strangers to sit in a room and enjoy a story about love. It's too bad that we're not typically driven to have those moments if it's not a response to something truly painful. At the same time, we have no shortage of painful things going on, so that's more than likely where it all comes from. What would be a time in your life where you felt kind of that uplifting, whatever you want to call it, frisson or something, that wasn't attached to tragedy in any way? A sunrise you saw, or something that filled you with awe?
Of course, I love improvisation, and there are moments when I'm on stage where things click perfectly, and without speaking a single word, another human being knows exactly what you're about to do, and so they can complement that. There is a high to that is you could never bottle that feeling and make it available to people, because it is a perfect storm of things going on, like that. I don't know, like a first kiss. Sure. Maybe that sometimes can give you, but am I confusing being Twitter-pated and butterflies in your stomach for that moment when that the world is changing around you? That's a good question. I've had the chance to be in an educational point for a lot of people. Down in Rutland, North Dakota. You, of course, came down there several years, and getting to know some of those kids and giving them an outlet that wasn't just sports. Yeah. Allowed them to be goofy and silly, and for them to know that there are no wrong answers in this space. I think that was pretty fun. And being able to watch people like Technical Sergeant Shelley Fink of the North Dakota Air National Guard grow into the person that she is today, and knowing that I had some kind of an influence on that.
A little bit. You had a tiny
just influence. Just a smidge. Her husband should be the one who's thanking me, because I'm the reason they're married.
By the way, I want to jump back to something you said earlier about bagpipes. Does anyone just casually listen to bagpipes?
Oh, I do.
It's Sunday, I'm going to put some bagpipes on today, and this is just going to play in the background. Really?
Yeah.
So you have like a CD of bagpipes that you listen to?
I do. In fact, there are whole Spotify playlists.
Is there any song that doesn't begin with...
Yeah, there are some that start with drums. So the Scots love drums, and they love bagpipes.
Not much to do in the Highlands.
So, what I love is I love watching someone in the high socks, like count off the 5, 6, 7, 8, and then watching the whole crowd go, and then shoving that giant bag of air underneath them and
what would be a really inappropriate ceremony for bagpipes?
To have a bagpipe?
Yeah.
It's interesting you ask that, because I listen to a lot of bagpipe covers of songs too. So hearing like a bagpipe Huey Lewis in the News song, or
during a bar mitzvah.
Well, what's that instrument that they use to play Hava Nagila? Like it's like it's like a higher pitched clarinet almost. It's got a bagpipey kind of tonality to it. So there are very few situations I feel bagpipes would be inappropriate for.
We've got a great bagpipe band in town here.
Oh, the Heather and Thistle.
They're fantastic.
Dan Aird, the guy who has been in charge of that for so many years, he taught almost all of those people how to play bagpipes.
Also, if you're in the area on St. Paddy's Day, they go from Irish pub to Irish pub and ask, hey, can we come in and play? And I don't think they ever get told no.
If you ever get the chance, there's a thing called the St. Andrew's Banquet that takes place. I believe it's the first Saturday of November. And it's a night where people honor their Scottish heritage. If you don't have any Scottish heritage, don't worry, you can try it. They have haggis, cockaliki soup, bashed neeps.
The one year I went, I was told that the haggis we were eating was not actual haggis. It was something else.
Well, no one makes real haggis anymore.
Which is sheep's stomach filled with
all the stuff you normally wouldn't eat. Yeah.
Okay.
And so the stuff you use today is more akin to like ground beef.
Yep, that's what it was. It was like a spiced ground beef.
Yeah, but there's liver in there and probably kidney, I imagine.
Yeah, so you are a Gordon.
I'm a Gordon. And a Davidson.
And a Davidson. I'm a McDonald from my mom's side.
We found out that we were warring clans for a little while, didn't we?
I remember I went to the St. Andrew's. Is that what the
St. Andrew's
banquet once?
The next day is the Kirkin o' the Tartan at the First Presbyterian Church where they bless the tartans.
I told someone as I was signing in what my Scottish surname was, and the woman who I said to was like in her 70s, just straight into my eyes said, "Oh, you and I are enemies."
My grandfather was one of the founders of the St. Andrew's Banquet in Fargo, and so they would have my grandmother stand every year and be honored. And as a birthday present, she no, I think she was Norwegian. If I had to attribute something to her, so I've been meaning to spit into a tube and send it away to one of those companies.
I did that. It was awesome.
Really?
Yep. What you will find is if you are truly Scottish. Is that, and I'm sure there's plenty of Irish in you too, because the Scottish and Irish did a ton of intermarrying all the time, very similar cultures. But my guess is you will get a large portion of the sequence back that says, like for me, it was like 60 to 70% Irish and British, and they group those together because it's basically so similar. And Scotland is part of that British piece.
Okay.
So my guess is you're gonna find much large portion is that, and then it'll break down from there.
I like that.
It's pretty cool.
I'm excited for it.
Yeah.
So my grandmother would stand at this banquet and be honored, and she'd cry a little bit, and that was sweet because it was a way to remember her husband. And then she would give all of us tickets to it as like birthday presents. And my parents hated going, and I think that
This was your dad's dad.
Yeah.
Dad's mom.
And so, and then I think his sister, my Aunt Jonelle, did not enjoy going to it as well. So once the kids were old enough to go to it, they're like, oh yeah, you guys go to this thing instead. But I always loved it. And they let me carry the Claymore a couple of years.
What are your, do you have your coat of arms? Do you know what the Gordon coat of arms is? Or
I do. It's got like a lion on it. I've got it somewhere.
Do you know your family motto?
It's probably on that same shield that I've got somewhere. What's the McDonald one?
It's in Latin.
Would you like fries with that?
I wish. It's in Latin, so I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, but probably not. Per mare per terris, I believe is how it's pronounced, which means by sea or by land. And it's a gauntleted hand. There's variations of it, but all the variations tend to have a gauntleted hand, usually holding a crucifix, and then sitting in a crown with a belt making a loop around it. And then the motto is on that. There's another...
Well, where's the sea?
What's that?
Where's the ship?
You don't see a ship in that one or land in that one. But there are variations. There are some... Because the McDonald clan...
I associate the cross with land.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Not with ships.
I see. Yeah.
Now, if you were like Moses, I'd be like, that would be a sandal.
Yeah. But like the McDonald people, there are some different subgroups in the McDonald's, the Donalds, the Donnells, all these other things. That there's a few other ones that say, my hope is constant within thee. And that's a secondary one. So it's fun. It's fun to read up on all that stuff.
I think that's pretty slick.
In fact, I think we should be coming up with coat of arms these days, like new ones.
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
Like when you start a family, JJ, I really think you should come up with a JJ Gordon family coat of arms.
Our family motto would be, where is the remote? and it would be a picture of a Lazy Boy recliner.
With some chicken wings.
Some chicken wings. Is there a way that we could make it a scratch and sniff coat of armor?
I figured it would be like a Jim Henson Muppet creatures on either side, kind of like the lions, but with big bulging eyes.
Maybe it'll be the fate of the door knockers from Labyrinth.
There you go.
That'd be a good
There
one.
you go. Yeah.
I wonder if I can get those for my actual door. I should work on it. So, my grandmother had a profound effect on my life because she was somebody who, instilled heritage in me. That was where I learned about heritage and respecting the years that had come before me and looking forward to the years after. I think our guest today is somebody who's had a profound effect. I bet our guest Greg Carlson's had a profound effect on you.
Very much so. Greg, I met my first summer at Trollwood June session, so I was going into the 9th grade, and Greg, that day I realized I just met the coolest adult I've ever met.
Who treated you like an adult.
Who was totally cool, didn't condescend, didn't talk down, really great teacher. And Greg, who is one of the smartest people that I know, has the ability to talk at length about almost any topic, which is pretty sweet, especially when we get into film conversations, which we do a lot with him about. But yeah, Greg's awesome. Greg, you've heard him before. He was here when we had our pinball episode with Bill Brooks.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I liked that episode.
Yeah.
And this one's fun too. I get deep into some genre work with Greg, and I happen to have picked Greg's least favorite genres of film. So that was some good dumb luck. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this. My guest is Dr. Greg Carlson on this episode of JJ Meets World.
JJ Meets World.
Welcome to the studio, Dr. Greg Carlson. Easily the biggest movie buff I know in the world.
People love movies.
They do love movies, and you're no different than anybody else. But you've taken it to like another level.
Yeah, I suppose so.
So much so that it's become your career. It's not just a passion for you, but you teach the art and the history of filmmaking.
I do. Yes. So I suppose I was about 4 years old when I saw my first movie in the theater, which was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. One of the various reissues, and my mom took me to that, and it just startled me and astonished me, and I thought, I got to see more of these movies. I want to go. The whole experience of seeing something in the theater excited me. So then, Star Wars at age 5, and the Phantom of the Opera at age 8 at Silent Movie Night. And those are the three that I always list. Those are the three pivotal movie-going experiences where I took my program from the Phantom of the Opera to show and tell to Mrs. Arneson's class in 3rd grade, and I knew that I wanted to do something for a living that related to the movies. I didn't even know how they were made necessarily at that point. But although Star Wars was the first movie where I was like, this world is bananas. This is crazy. I believed it. I thought it seemed real to me. So
now you get to teach it, which is exciting.
It is. Yeah. It's like they say, if you have a job you love, you never work a day in your life. And that's sort of a cliche that's been true for me because I show movies and we then read essays about them and essays about, theories that might apply to them. And then we discuss it in a group, and the classes might range in size from, 10 people all the way up to 50 people. And it's just, we try to make, you get everybody involved because like you said at the beginning of the show, everybody loves the movies and talking about the movies.
So I'm going to dig right into some we're going to do a deep dive here.
All right.
Okay?
I like the deep dive.
Good. Fantastic. So I'm going to name a couple genres.
Yeah.
And I want you to name a movie that you enjoy from that genre.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's your favorite. I'm not saying that
All right.
You need to pick it, but let's start with this. Buddy cop.
Oh, well, I mean, the instant jump to mind is Lethal Weapon, but the hotter take is I like, which is the Lethal Weapon with is it Patsy Kensit plays it's the one that takes place with the South African bad guy. Which one is that? Is that Lethal Weapon 2?
Yeah, that's the second one.
The second one.
Where they really push Joe Pesci's character.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, what was his name? Leo gets.
Yep.
Whatever Leo wants, Leo gets. But I like that one because it had this. I remember seeing that one at the Fargo Theater, and spoiler alert: Patsy Kensett's character meets an untimely end, and there's this like moment of really intense acting for Mel Gibson where he can't save her, and he just kind of loses it. He's crying and he's raging, and that he's gonna. That's the trigger. It's gonna ratchet up. He's gonna go after this bad guy with and he's gonna terminate with extreme prejudice. So I'm gonna say Lethal Weapon 2.
Okay, excellent. I like that. Now let's stick with Lethal Weapon for a second.
Okay.
As that series progressed,
Yeah.
do you feel like it got more watered down? Do you enjoy there's 4, right?
Yeah,
4
there's-
theatrical films.
Yeah, I think so.
So far.
You're right. Well, in that television series, it's airing right now.
I think that when you talk about genre, they're really elastic. They really stretch, and so you can do so many things within a genre. And I suppose that even by Lethal Weapon 2, there are elements of self-parody. And this is Richard Donner, right? I mean, he knows what's funny. I mean, he's been Donner's like an old school guy who goes back in the business to like the golden age. He was working with people from the middle of the 20th century. And so I think the buddy cop movie is we were talking about diminishing returns earlier before we started recording, and it's a pretty shop worn genre. It's not one that I get like when I saw Ride Along.
Mhm.
I wanted to like it much more than I did. Figured maybe if I was 14 would have liked it like
Sure.
I like Lethal Weapon when I saw that.
Lethal Weapon's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think
Yeah,
of buddy cop.
yeah.
it sets the tone. For it.
It's a high watermark one.
There are people who say other movies, and I'm like, I don't constitute those as buddy cop because not both characters aren't cops.
Right.
So
Well,
like Ride
sure.
Along, he's
Sure,
not a
yeah.
police officer, right?
Right, correct.
yeah.
He sort of aspires to be, the Kevin Hart character aspires to be a police officer, but he doesn't have the chops yet.
Okay, so moving right along,
Okay.
movies that involve puppetry.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that you have to pick like a
No.
Muppet movie or anything like
Right.
that, but things that use puppetry in a unique way.
Yeah,
maybe.
sure. Well, The Dark Crystal is one that I saw as a kid, and I was I liked the world that it built, and I liked the puppetry a lot in the movie. I haven't seen it for years, and I know it was just playing theatrically again this weekend. I thought about going, but it didn't work out timing wise. But I like, of course, the Jim Henson Creature Shop is like, I know you're a big fan. That's a high bar, when it involves puppetry. But I'll say another. Here's a dark horse choice. I saw a biopic of the French pop artist Serge Gainsbourg, and who's the father of Charlotte Gainsbourg, and it has like this really cool expressionistic way of telling his story. So it's not like a typical biopic where it's just an actor portraying like the Cliff's Notes highlights of this guy's life. It imagines him in all these different guises, and Doug Jones plays one version of him with this great kind of puppet-like head and big beakish, hawkish nose. And that one, it's not necessarily a great film, but I thought, the way they did something in a biopic I hadn't seen was memorable.
In another episode, I referenced. Have you seen the documentary on Wayne White, the guy who built all the stuff from Pee-wee's?
Yeah.
That was one where I was really blown away at what he's doing with puppetry
Right.
in
Yeah.
art installations,
Mhm.
and some of that stuff he's just building to build it. Like one is a
Yeah.
2-story tall head of Richard Nixon, I think it was, just for fun.
I was lucky enough to be at the world premiere of Morgan Neville's new documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, about Mr. Rogers. I know you're also a Mr. Rogers
nice.
fan. And I would say that Mr. Rogers is an underrated puppeteer. When I saw the film, it made me remember just how talented he was as a voice artist, because he's doing almost all the characters in the Land of Make-Believe are almost all Fred Rogers. And as a child, they were very distinct to me. And I probably didn't even know or think about the fact that it was Fred Rogers like performing all of them, even though in season 7, I just showed this to my kids, there's an episode where he like pulls back the curtain, and we go behind the scenes, and he opens the case, and he pulls out each puppet, shows how he does the voice, and I was like, mind blowing. It's great.
I always think of the episode where his goldfish dies.
Yeah.
And he has to bury the goldfish in the backyard and makes a small tombstone for it of like I want to say like
it's a cross.
Post-it or something, right?
It's a cross because he gets one of his neighbor friends to nail it to help him nail it together and then put it into the ground.
That's right. I remember that affecting me as a kid.
Yeah.
Because that would have been the very first thing on television made for kids that I would have seen ever address the issue of death.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
I always think of that.
Totally remarkable.
And that his postman's name was Mr. McFeely.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they'd name a character that these days.
Yeah. Well,
I was just talking to someone about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and how people who take a cynical look at it nowadays of like, oh, this weird guy down the street and he wants you to come over, and every show opens with him taking his shoes off and putting on, his house coat. And I thought to myself, you're the one projecting that idea onto these, because to me, if we could all be a little bit more like Fred Rogers and his neighborhood, we'd be a happier world, man.
Yeah. He was at the Q&A. Morgan Neville was joined by one of his co-producers, who is the son of Yo-Yo Ma, who obviously was, that's how Yo-Yo Ma was introduced to thousands, hundreds of thousands probably of kids, was through Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And they talked about, to some degree, about the fact that Mr. Rogers is actually a pretty conservative guy. He's a registered Republican. But yet his capacity for just, I guess what you'd call goodness was so vast that a lot of these things, like the goldfish, feeding the goldfish and him narrating it, was presumably the result of a blind viewer who wrote in worried that the fish wasn't getting fed. So, I mean, the fact that he would take into account like all these, it was the first time a lot of us encountered anything that was what we would call the other or different,
It was in the Carol Spinney documentary where they talk about when Big Bird went to go visit, and Fred Rogers was like, okay, so you're going to come in the front door, and then we're going to take, the top of the costume off, and you'll show the kids how it works. And no, I can't ruin it for the kids. Well, I can't lie to the kids. And then that ultimate compromise between two giants of children's television saying, well, we'll just have Big Bird in the land of make-believe.
Perfect.
Easy solve.
The Carol Spinney story caused me to cry unexpectedly. Greg and I saw it for the first time in Toronto, and it was still on the festival circuit. It's a great film. If you haven't seen it, you got to see it. But if you have nostalgia for Sesame Street and Big Bird, right away at the beginning of the film, he's getting into costume on set. He's wearing the legs because it's like a pants with the suspenders. And then there's the Big Bird top that gets put on him, and there's an assistant who is helping him get it on. And so you see kind of Big Bird is kind of misshapen as Carol Spinney's getting into the costume, and then his hand kind of gets into the head, and you see Big Bird start to blink, and he kind of turns his eyes, and he turns to the woman who is helping him get together, and he goes, in Big Bird's voice, hello, Susan. And suddenly I just went, just out my eyes, because this magical moment just happened where Big Bird just came to life in front of me on screen, as if like Big Bird was away somewhere. And then once he's in character, suddenly Big Bird is saying hello to the people on the set. It was fantastic. Compounding with the fact that when we watched it, Carol Spinney and his wife were in attendance and came on stage afterwards. And he brought not a lot of people know this, but he also plays the voice of Oscar the Grouch and has been the puppeteer for Oscar the Grouch since the beginning. He's the only original cast member of Sesame Street who I believe is still on the show,
now is he still on, JJ?
Is
he
retired now?
I think he's handed the physicality part of Big Bird over, but I'm pretty sure he's still doing Oscar.
So he's still involved in some way.
And I want to say, I think Frank Oz still voices Grover.
Really?
I think he comes in and does he does 5 days, and that's it. And then he does Grover. I don't think he does Bert anymore. But I'm pretty sure that he wanted to maintain Grover. I'm going to have to double check on that, but I think somebody was talking about that because there's a new documentary, men talking about Muppets.
Oh, I have not seen that.
It's a round table of
nice.
Who was it? It's Fran Brill, Dave Goles, Frank Oz. gosh, I'm not going to remember, but
Yeah.
they just talk about working for Jim Henson. They talk about puppetry, all that neat stuff out there.
Who among the original Muppeteers are gone besides Jim? Is Jerry Nelson alive, or is
No,
he
he's passed,
died?
yeah.
Because the Count was just that's where it was at for me as a kid. That was the first Sesame Street toy that I requested was a Count puppet, and I got it. So I love Jerry Nelson.
He had such a funny sense, especially with the Count, where when I go back and watch classic episodes, even Follow That Bird, which I think is as close to a perfect movie as you can get when you're, when people talk about TV adaptations, like that one nails it.
Yeah.
But he takes a character that, I mean, is a blood-sucking vampire for all purposes, and he makes it fun and funny. And I love how the Count just is sort of in his own world. And, nowadays we'd probably label that as being on a spectrum somewhere, and he's got OCD. But for the most part, he was just this guy who loved numbers.
Yeah, I love characters in children's programming that have innocent compulsions. So the Count is one, Cookie Monster is another, where it's almost like an Achilles heel to them that they could be focusing on one thing, and then you bring a cookie in the room and Cookie Monster has to focus on that. I don't have a better description of why I love those characters, but it has something to do with their compulsion. Like Oscar the Grouch's compulsion to be a Grouch is awesome. That rules. Like it's this thing about himself that he can't walk away from. He's stuck with it. I love that.
To answer your question, I think Dave Goelz is the only original member who's still left.
Okay,
and he's Gonzo, and other characters. With the firing of
Kevin Clash.
No, not the guy who took over Kermit.
Oh, right. Yes, I know who you're talking about now. I remember that after. that was more recent even than Kevin Clash.
I think because he's been around for a long time doing various characters, but I think Dave Goelz is the last. Well, Fran Brill's been with Sesame Street since it started. She does the voice of Prairie Dawn. What interests me is some of those characters now are 40 plus years old, but they haven't aged a day.
Yeah.
Somehow, Felt really keeps up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So
it's just like The Simpsons,
Yeah, right.
They've been on the air longer than any scripted series, and they haven't aged, but yet they live through all these different political eras and different presidents. I just love that.
What grade is Bart in?
Well, he's 10 years old, right? So he's in fourth grade. I think Bart. I believe.
Which is, and so that puts Lisa like in second grade.
Yeah, I think so.
Wow. They're smart kids. Okay, so historical biopic.
Oh boy, that's like you just picked my least favorite genre.
There you
Maybe
go.
you knew that.
Good.
The biopic is just not a genre that I have ever really enjoyed for some reason, because I like nonfiction storytelling so much. I would almost always rather see a documentary about any historical figure than the fictional version of it. There are some great performances. I think it was fun to watch Daniel Day-Lewis imagine Abraham Lincoln's voice in a way that we maybe hadn't considered before, things like that. But that's a stumper. I'll say that's a stumper, because usually I find myself, after I see, especially things that get kind of critical plaudits for possible awards, things like I Walk the Line, and I'm like, man, Joaquin Phoenix is an incredible actor, and I love watching him in so many things, but Johnny Cash is Johnny Cash, and there's no way anyone's going to be able to imitate him effectively, not even Joaquin Phoenix.
Just recently, I saw, I'm going to butcher, it's JoJo Dancer, Your Time is Calling, the Richard Pryor.
Yeah, yes.
Which I understand. It was like a biopic when it came out, but then he said, well, this really isn't who I was or what I did. And so there's kind of a controversy back and forth about that. And I was very confused by the movie because they use a lot of different mechanics that I didn't understand. Like it sort of felt like It's a Wonderful Life, seeing like the past and the future, but then they would interact with some characters and some characters not. To me, it didn't quite hit the mark.
Yeah.
But it reminded me, oddly enough, of, have you ever seen, it's a French film called Le Gloire de Mon Père?
I don't think so.
It's about a French writer, and it's a summer of his childhood around the early 1900s.
No, I haven't seen that.
It is phenomenal.
Okay.
It's just one of those things where, and to me, what's nice about it is they're not telling a story that's famous. Like Johnny Cash's life played out on page 6, and his relationship with June Carter was talked about. But this is a story I didn't know, telling just a snippet of a person's life.
Nice.
But I kind of agree with you where I haven't, a lot of The Post got a lot of acclaim this last year, and I did not care for it. All it did is make me want to watch All the President's Men when I left.
That's what I had the same reaction.
So we'll move along. How about a courtroom drama?
Oh, and you picked another, like my second least favorite genre. So back to back. There's only I used to say, and I don't know if it's true because I think there are exceptions to the rule, but I used to always say when asked about that genre, I'd say there's one good one, or there's the gold standard by which all other ones are measured, and that's To Kill a Mockingbird, the adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird, which is as good as it gets because the courtroom stuff doesn't slow down or stop the narrative. It's so important to the arc of the story and Scout's perspective on life and what's happening and life and how to live it. And it seems like in the genre of the courtroom drama, most of them, you build up to the courtroom scene and then that becomes your de facto kind of climax of the movie. And I think To Kill a Mockingbird kind of circumvents that a little bit. So how about you?
For a courtroom drama, for the most part, I just don't care for them.
Yeah.
I'd love to say something like Civil Action maybe, but to me, the exciting part of stuff like that, even I think you take a movie like Erin Brockovich, they bypassed all the courtroom stuff to begin with because this isn't interesting. We want to see her out with the people.
Yeah.
There is an excellent courtroom scene in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country.
Oh, yes.
Where it's Kirk and I think Bones are the two that are in a Klingon court, and a ancestor of Worf is there. Pretty good courtroom scene. That would be my top pick.
Do you remember what happens to them in that courtroom scene?
I don't.
They're sentenced to go live on a prison planet. They're found guilty of murder of an ambassador, I believe.
Which is funny because you'd think murder wouldn't be illegal in the Klingon Empire. You'd think, if anything, it'd be sort of like, have you not murdered anyone yet this year? What are you doing?
If a Klingon murders somebody, it's rah-rah, good for you. But if someone murders a Klingon...
Oh, I see. Okay.
I mean, I don't want to get into the semantics of how the Federation views
it's a pretty deep
crimes.
It's a pretty deep, sociopolitical infrastructure that we're talking about.
Okay, so how about this? Do you have a favorite Star Trek film?
You just probably named the third thing.
Greg, now good.
We're hitting,
I like it. We're really. I told you it was a deep dig.
We are. It is a deep dive. I love that. I'm going to say that you're hitting for the cycle because after the biopic, the courtroom drama, I also was so ingrained with I was a Star Wars kid that I watched part of Star Trek: The Motion Picture in its television when it was on network television. And I remember that there was a bald woman. Do you remember this in the movie? And they had an action figure of the bald woman. And I found that very appealing. But I never watched a Star Trek movie from start to finish. I would catch little bits and pieces on TV because I watched the original series and enjoyed it when it was on reruns, for years and years. And then it wasn't until the reboot that I watched, went to a Star Trek film in the theater. So I saw none of the original Star Trek series theatrically, and I didn't see any of the Next Generation or the other series that were made into films theatrically. That's a little known fact about me as a moviegoer.
That is
avoided them. So,
I would consider myself a star, if you have to be in one camp or the other, a Star Wars fan. But there was one summer where my roommate and I watched through every single Star Trek film, and my takeaway is what is considered the least liked Star Trek film. Can you guess which one is my favorite?
It might be the same as me because it's Voyage Home.
It is
Voyage Home, where they go to San Francisco in the 80s, because the whole premise is that a seemingly malevolent alien being has approached Earth, and it's sending a signal that's disrupting all Earth communications, and it's really destructive. They can't figure out what it is. They're coming back from the Star Trek 3 mission, so they're still on the Klingon Bird of Prey.
Yep.
So they do not fly an Enterprise at all in that movie, and they discover that they analyze the signal and they realize it's the same as humpbacked whales, which have been extinct on Earth for a couple thousand years. And so they construct a plan to travel back in time to get one and land
slingshot around the sun.
Slingshot around the sun,
as we do.
Land in San Francisco in I think 1985.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a lot of fish out of water.
Right. There's a scene where on the subway, isn't there some thug?
They're on a bus, I think.
That
Yeah,
are a
very
bus or
similar.
some public transportation, and then Spock has to intervene or something when the situation looks like it's going to escalate into violence.
And that Walter Koenig, who I actually had the chance to sit down and ask about this once, has the nuclear vessels line as a Russian expat who can't pronounce the V.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of great stuff like that. Kirk doesn't know how to swear, and guy calls him a dumbass because he's walking in the road, and he says, "Well, double dumbass to you." It's a great movie.
My favorite part is when Bones they go to a hospital because Chekhov, I think, falls off of like a landing, right? And so they go to a hospital, and he's looking at all the equipment. He goes, "These barbarians! It's the Dark Ages." And so he asks some woman what she's doing. She's like, "Well, I'm on kidney dialysis." And he's like, "Oh God, why don't they just stick you in the side with a knife?" And he uses like a phaser and cures whatever disease was ailing her in this little hospital. And I have more fun with that one than any of the other Star Trek films until the reboot. And I was like, I think the reboot, and it's not even a reboot, right?
It's whatever it is.
Yeah. It takes place in an alternate timeline.
Yeah,
but I like that. I thought that was a fun thing to do with it.
Yeah. Of the three of us in the room, I'm definitely the Star Trek head, and not to, take a poo on Star Wars. I love Star Wars as well. I, as a fan, have gotten a lot more out of Star Trek, and it's my whole family is pretty big Trek fans from the beginning. So with the caveat that I can absolutely declare that the Star Trek movies don't come close to the Star Wars movies. That when it comes to Star Trek, the real meat is in the TV series. Yeah,
they're born of different media and different times, and I think they have a different agenda.
Yeah.
And that's why it's sort of a fool's errand to do is it Star Trek versus Star Wars?
Because they both have star in the title.
Yeah, right.
But
I'm of the opinion that I think the way Star Trek can set itself apart in this 21st century world of ours is to do an R-rated Star Trek film that take things a little bit darker and a little bit, because it is a darker series to begin with.
But you're also pointing at, I think, a very fundamental difference between something like Star Wars and something like Star Trek, where Star Wars is very much swashbuckling fantasy, good versus evil, mythological mythos kind of thing like that. The story that we've known for a long time, but in a beautiful new package. And Star Trek is very much speculative science fiction, where it's rooted in our world in some way, and usually is used to explore issues that we are
the
exploring
episodic
today.
nature has this kind of like ethical conundrum that you can go through and sort of how should we behave?
Yeah, and if you are a Star Trek fan, if you can pinpoint what that particular fan's favorite series is, you'll learn a lot about that fan's tastes.
Like your Next Generation.
Next Generation all the way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Captain Picard is my captain. Like, if he tells me to go, I go.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter that the effects are garbage for me, because I love living in that world. And it's also, Next Generation is, I think, the best example of it. And we don't have to stay on Star Trek for too long, but where the future is good, right? Where it's a hopeful series. Humankind itself on Earth has solved its problems. There's no want. There's no scarcity. Things like racism and sexism are mostly things of the past.
The whales are dead, Tucker. All the whales are gone.
No, but now they've been reignited. They're back in the 23rd century again as of that movie. So Star Trek saved the whales.
How do we know that them taking those whales isn't what caused whales to go extinct?
Well, I guess the Abrams
parody.
Abrams reboot does split off before that movie happens. So if you're talking about what that is called, which is, I think, the Kelvin timeline, which is basically just the Abrams movies, or that and the Lin movie. The whales are dead.
Let's face it, J.J. Abrams is the one steering the helm of that. Even when Justin Lin directs it, he's following a path set by another person. So, Greg, let's talk about this. What's a movie that people don't give enough credit to that you think is awesome? I already know mine.
Oh, you do? Okay.
It's on my phone right now.
Oh, well, I'll answer with a brilliant black comedy directed by Bob Balaban, who's also, wonderful performer, called Parents, which is a kind of allegory about a young boy coming to terms with his impending puberty, because he knows his parents do something in the dark at night in private, but he doesn't know what that is. And so the film uses cannibalism as the metaphor for this. And it is so brilliantly written, directed, and performed. I love this movie, and I used to recommend it to everybody that would cross my path and ask me a question like that. And I had a few film cinephile friends who would give me a hard time about it. I don't know why. There was a guy who went to the MSU film program, and his name was Mike Larson. And he used to, every time he'd see me, he's like, "Hey, do you still like that movie, Parents?" And I don't know why he did that for years after. But it has a great soundtrack, and the production. It's set in the 1950s, and it's Randy Quaid is the dad, and Mary Beth Hurt is the mom, and Sandy Dennis is brilliant as the school psychologist. And it's just it's a wicked good movie, and it's been reissued now. It's findable on there's a nice Blu-ray version of it. So
Yeah,
Parents
it came out not too long ago, right?
Yeah,
I remember coming by the Parents VHS cover many times at Take Two Video back in
it's
the
a memorable
day.
cover.
It is.
Mhm.
It reminds me of, I don't really think that they hit the mark on cover art nowadays.
Yeah.
And they used to really, that would be the reason I take stuff home, was the cover art
Definitely.
was so good. I remember there was a movie called Hunchback on Campus.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that.
That I rented just because the cover art was so good. It was so good.
Yeah, we were having a similar conversation about cover art, and there was a swamp exploitation movie called Gator Bait with Claudia Jennings, and it wasn't the original cover art that was on the posters when it was theatrically released. It was a particular VHS version that was the one that generations of fans would see going into their video store, and I couldn't wait till I was old enough or brave enough to actually take the tape up and rent it, even if I wasn't 17 yet.
I wonder if the people who worked when I was a young man at Take Two Video, if they realized the influence they had on me growing up, because I rented some pretty bizarre stuff, and then they would recommend some pretty weird stuff because they knew, they're like, "You're a sweatpants kid. We get it. You ride here, you get a 5 for $5 every 2 days. So we know what kind of person you are." But that's how I was introduced to. Have you ever seen The Road to Wellville?
The Road to Wellville, yes.
Yeah, with Anthony Hopkins.
Yep. Is that about Kellogg?
It is.
Yeah.
Have all three of us worked in video rental stores?
Yes. Here.
Which video rental store were you at?
I worked at, it was called Premier Video.
Okay.
Which was at the time owned by CEC, Cinema Entertainment Corporation, before Marcus bought it. It was the owner of the local, with the exception of the Fargo Theater, the local movie theaters.
Okay. I was Videoland and Video Action. Videoland for a year, which is I think a famous, locally famous video store.
Yeah, Videoland's like the original, sort of the flagship of all.
Salute to Rudy Sigmund, the man who started it all. Who also, I believe, was the originator of ValleyCon back in the day. But then Video Action, shortly after that, I didn't spend too long there, so I don't have too many memories from that place. JJ, of course, also has worked at a video rental.
I worked at 2 different Take Two Videos, and I pretty much spent enough time at what was called Home Box Office on South University Drive that I pretty much worked there. I helped them restock from time to time as a kid.
I miss the days where you could go to Hornbacher's and rent a movie, and it was a system where all the cases were out front, and they each had a little tag on the bottom, and you take that up to the front, and they'd give you the video. That's where I saw my first anime movies was through there, which were incredibly violent, but my parents had no idea because they were cartoons. It's awesome.
I rented some anime through the comic book shop on University, on Comic Junction.
Okay.
And because one of the guys was really into anime, and so that was what their primary stock in trade was for video rentals. That's how I saw things that I probably shouldn't have seen at a tender age.
Oh, I rented Fritz the Cat thinking it'd be a fun animated movie for me to watch as a kid. And
Sure.
about halfway through, I remember one of my parents coming in being like, well, we're turning this off right now.
Friday nights at my mom's house was always we'd get a movie and she'd put in a frozen pizza for my sister
Awesome.
and I. And she would pick the movie because she was trying to, protect us. And usually it was like a live action Disney film that she remembered growing up, something like that. The One and Only Genuine Original Family Band, Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, things like that. But one time she got a live action Pocahontas because the Pocahontas animated film had just come out the previous year. And she had to, my sister and I got left alone for a little bit. She had to go do something. And there's a topless makeout scene between John Smith and Pocahontas on the beach. Snuck that one past my mom. So Mom, if you're listening, you let me see boobs because you rented Brianna and I a live action Pocahontas movie.
My aunt used to rent 16 millimeter movies from the public library. So you could get a projector and a reel of film. And we would watch stuff like the Apple Dumpling Gang and Laurel and Hardy was a popular set of films that went out. And one time we were at the basement of my cousin's house and the take-up reel, she didn't get the film hooked in right. So we watched we put like an entire hundreds and hundreds of feet of film on the carpet. And that was as entertaining for the kids. We were just like whooping it out. As soon as we realized that was happening, we were like, look at this. So the good old days, with really, truly physical media in that sense.
Have you collected all the types of media over the years? Like, did you get into Laserdisc when Laserdisc was the thing?
Yeah, still have one shelf. I have one. I've retained one shelf of Laserdisc, and my wife Katie always says, why do we need to keep this? But it's just there's something about the memory, the historical memory of having it, because it was very carefully curated and cultivated by me at that time. I mean, when I was in college, that's when I was into Laserdisc. So I have like Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is one that I would never part with because it's just a movie I loved so much. And that was the first format I owned it on happened to be Laserdisc.
I mean, I've known you since I think 1999.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I've known that you were an archivist and a completist.
Right.
In a sense. And it would seem that Katie would understand why Greg Carlson needs to keep these Laserdiscs.
I know. I think at a certain point, though, when the DVD collection started taking over the house, it was like something drastic had to happen. So it was a huge step for me to get rid of all the cases. I let all the DVD cases go and just put them in albums. So I have like stacks of albums filled with DVDs. And it's not easy to keep track of what's in what. There's various systems that are recommended online you can find, to help you keep organized. But most of the time, the kids will just they'll just be flipping through, and that's just kind of like being at a video store. It's sort of fun. They can look at something and go, is this something I can watch?
Does that mean that you have a curtain in the corner of the room that says 18 or over?
There's definitely
the poster of like stop or my mom will shoot before you walk in the back.
Yeah, that's right. A big warning.
I doubled down really hard on HD DVD when it was deciding which one was going to win. I'm like, well, if Microsoft is behind this, they're the number one, right? There's no way HD DVD is not going to work. And so I've got about 40 that I haven't been able to watch since my 360 went kaput.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been trying to think about somebody who is obsessive about collecting those and wants to see Knocked Up on that particular format.
Yeah. What about 4K? Are you getting into you get UHD yet?
I have stopped buying
Physical media.
Any physical media, mainly because I did the same thing. I've got these giant CD wallets full of DVDs, and I could kill Warner Brothers right now for when they release DVDs, they would do two-sided, but the title would be on a little tiny ring, and some of those have started to wear away, so. I when I'm flipping through, I've got two binders that are full of those that I've had to put individual labels on it.
Would you ever just flip it to the 4x3 side and write on that side, knowing you'll probably never play?
That's pretty good.
That one.
That's a good idea.
That's a good idea, but my handwriting is so bad. And you never know what's going to seep through to the other side.
This movie's called 43. Interesting.
But it was tough for me to get rid of those cases.
Yeah.
Did you recycle yours? Did you keep the inserts or anything like that?
Yeah, I kept the inserts. I took a a 3-hole punch or I made it into a 2-hole punch, and then have a binder so that I can keep things alphabetized. So all the inserts I kept, and that's kind of handy to be able to look up stuff. I also now have I just use a spreadsheet too to keep track of what I have, because at a certain point when you're a multiple format person and you've got things that are in so many different places, just like remembering, do I own, like when Tucker said earlier that I'm a completist, for certain things I will buy at every single iteration it comes out.
Like Blade Runner, I believe, is one that you...
I have, I just have a lot of versions of that, going back to VHS, I'm sure. So this is the first time I saw it was on VHS. I wanted to see Blade Runner theatrically, but my parents wouldn't let me see it. And so I would go to B. Dalton Bookseller in the West Acres Mall, and they had magazines and then a couple of books that around the time that Blade Runner was coming out. And that's how I got my Blade Runner fix before it was like a year or two before it was on HBO, and then I could go to my friend's house, and that's how I watched it. His older brother taped it on HBO for us. So the original theatrical version was the first version of Blade Runner I saw, which I liked it. But then as the lore and legend grew and all the various directors' cuts came out, I'm happy to keep up with them.
Sure. I mean, Harrison Ford needs that residual check. It's a big deal. Yeah. He's got to keep crashing planes.
He's got to pay for his plane insurance.
One thing that I think is a forgotten aspect, and kids today won't realize. Do you remember when a movie would come out and then they would put out a companion like flip book with a record?
Mm-hmm.
And so the record would have the words that are on the page, and then it would go like, beep, and you'd turn the page.
Yes.
They had one of those for Gremlins that my preschool would read to us every day, and I'm terrified. Gremlins still to this day, I love it. I think it is a brilliant dark comedy, but it still scares me. There are times when I turn off the light, I've got to get into bed really quick because I don't want the Gremlins to get me.
Yeah.
But there are things that they used to do with almost everything that was released that they don't do anymore. And one of those is the companion books.
Yeah.
I'm into collecting the novelizations of things right now.
Novelizations are great. The photo novelizations are great.
Oh, they're fantastic.
The storybook too was the thing. Those were my favorite. I have a whole bunch of they were sort of in a thin, glossy, hardbound version that would always come apart if you read it a lot. And so I have a lot of them that are just barely hanging together, like E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and of course the Star Wars films all had those storybooks.
So what's something you think is overrated? We've talked about, a little sleeper, something that people should see. What about something that you think?
Just like a recent movie, or just in general, a classic movie that's overrated? I don't know. I mean, that's a challenging question in some ways, because when you think about the job of the critic versus the job of the moviegoer, the people's choice kind of stuff. And we could take the Oscars as a good example. You can have up to 10 movies can be nominated for Best Picture, but yet only 5 directors are nominated, which seems insulting to the directors of those films who don't receive a nomination, and yet they get a Best Picture nod. And that is, I find that really interesting, why that doesn't correspond. And then historically, and unlike Matt O'Lean, I'm not an Oscar historian. He really is the local authority on Oscars. But I'm fascinated by times when a film wins Best Picture, but then someone else wins Best Director. That's what kind of, and it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, or
that was Brokeback Mountain, wasn't it?
Brokeback Mountain, I believe that happened too. I think the year that Driving Miss Daisy won in 1989 beat for the films of '89 beat Do the Right Thing, which history proves Do the Right Thing is probably the superior film. But the guy who directed Driving Miss Daisy, I think it was Bruce Beresford, wasn't even nominated for Best Director, and it won Best Picture.
Did Spielberg win for Private Ryan? Because that went to Shakespeare in Love that year. I remember.
Did he win Best Director? Yeah, I don't know.
I think he did.
You need the Matt O'Lean brain right here, because he would just have that. He has the total recall on like any of those wins. When we were doing the interview that for Mike Schultz's documentary, Tucker and I were there, and for his warm up, Matt O'Lean, one of his parlor tricks, he'll just start with Wings, and then he can just go straight through and name every Best Picture winner,
really,
like Machine Gun, without missing a beat. So not a bad.
So what you're saying is, if you're gonna play a trivia game with Matt O'Lean, make it football related.
Yeah. Well, don't do that either because he's really into football.
Oh no!
But right, I mean, Oscar trivia is his specialty.
So here's the weird thing about Saving Private Ryan. I think this strengthens your point, Greg. Saving Private Ryan in 1999 won Oscars for Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Sound, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound Effects Editing, and still didn't win Best Picture.
Right.
Even though all of those other things that seemed like they would lock it up for Best Picture went to Private Ryan.
Uh-huh.
I'm always intrigued by this. Is a few years ago, a pretty famous actress said, "Well, I hardly ever watch any of the movies that I get sent. I give them to my kids, and then I ask them their opinion, and I'll write down what they say."
Oh, yeah, for the voting.
And then Stephen Tobolowsky, in his podcast, he talks about how he's been when someone puts forth a film to get to a nomination process, you don't have to watch the whole movie. You have to watch it's like a weird 64 and a half minutes of a feature length is all you have to watch. And so you'll be in a screening with all these other people, and at that exact moment, they'll get up and walk out, whether or not. And he talks about how infuriating it is because they don't even see the end of the movie, but they've already made their mind up about whether or not this is going to get accolades from them or not. And I think it's a flawed system when it comes down to it. And in my opinion, so is the critical system. I think it's if you identify with someone and like what they say, that's great, but don't take it as the gospel.
Yeah.
You do a lot of film reviews yourself.
Right.
And when I read your reviews, I never find it to be like, don't go see this movie, but you give me reasons why I might not enjoy this movie as much as another.
I think that when the Orlando Sentinel film critic Roger Moore was visiting the film festival a couple years ago, we were together on a panel and we were talking about film writing and film criticism. And he said, what I do is I review a movie, which means I try to I arm the public with enough information to help them make a decision whether they want to spend their money on that movie that weekend. And he said, what I get to do is a little bit different. In that I'm kind of writing an essay about the movie. And so when people, and these are friends, will say to me, I couldn't tell if you liked it or not. That's not an insult to me because that's not really what I'm interested in exploring when I'm writing about a movie. And it's true that I used to write a lot more pans. I used to enjoy writing the takedown, writing the super snarky, eviscerating, mean-spirited kind of review. I reviewed Miss March, for example. Today I would not even bother with a film like Miss March. But at the time I thought, this will be hilarious because this movie's so awful. I can just write a great, it'll be so much fun to write the review. It's
you're the second person in a week who's brought up that film, which is just bizarre.
Yeah, I thought it was totally forgotten. I mean, because it probably should have been, with the exception of one great visual gag. I saw the movie with Jeff Casper. There's a scene where this RV or bus or something is bouncing down the road and a character bounces out the window of the RV and then another character, a character is turned and then they turn back and the person's gone and you don't know what happened. It's one of those. And I remember we laughed out loud at that moment, but the rest of it is virtually gone from my memory, even though I wrote about this movie.
On a previous episode of the podcast, we had one of the truck drivers for the film Drop Dead Fred on the podcast,
Awesome.
Kevin Kennedy, who now teaches drama at South High.
Okay. I love Drop Dead Fred.
That's just what I wanted to get.
Yeah.
Where does Drop Dead Fred rank for you in the pantheon of underappreciated films?
Well, I think it has a cult following. I mean, there's definitely people out there who like Drop Dead Fred because of the people involved in the movie, the actors especially, because Phoebe Cates is, she was just absolutely, she was fantasy fuel for generations. I mean, everybody who worked at a video store knows the story that every VHS copy of Fast Times at Ridgemont High is worn out from the rewinding and the step framing during the pool scene, So
when we just talked about Gremlins a little bit, she's
Phoebe Cates. She keeps bubbling up, and I think she's still married to Kevin Kline. Is that right?
Yeah.
Are they still together? Yeah.
In fact, her most recent credit was 2016.
Really?
She had a small role, but for the most part, she's given up acting. which is
not doing as much. There was a movie she was in very early on. I think it was even pre-Fast Times called Private School for Girls?
Yeah.
And Franny Bay, who's a great Canadian, now deceased Canadian actress who David Lynch loved, and she played Mrs. Tremont in Twin Peaks, and she was also in other Lynch films. She's in that movie, and there's a scene where a character ends up doing a Lady Godiva, and the horse goes by, and it cuts to a close-up of Frances Bay, and she's the prim and proper with all the marmish, board of regent type backers of the school, and she says, "That's the finest example of bareback riding I've ever seen," or something like that. And I remember when I saw the film, I laughed out loud.
Believe there's also a scene during the graduation sequence where all of the girls turn around and none of them are wearing underwear.
In the crowd, yeah.
I feel like making movies in the 80s was a lot easier than it was making movies today.
Well, there's no doubt. Yeah, I mean that's a podcast for another conversation when talk about the post Weinstein era and just what does that mean for movie going? I don't think it necessarily will have a chilling effect on the type of raunchy comedy that still seems to be the author Bernard Dick says genres never die. They may kind of fade in popularity, but they will always come roaring back because the genre is very durable. And so teenage boys of the 80s certainly spent a lot of time watching these movies that are. I was just Forrest was asking me, what are some great 80s movies? So he wanted to list off his favorite 80s movies. And in my head, I was thinking about all these sexploitation comedies I watched, like the My movies, like My Tutor and My Chauffeur and My Bodyguard, which isn't an exploitation one, but I wondered what was the reason for having all these movies called My this thing. But anyway,
I have a kind of a separate question from this topic. Greg, there are many movies that are considered by cinephiles holy grails. Ones that are just out of reach or maybe lost or forgotten. A classic, probably the one that always comes to mind is Jerry Lewis's The Day
the Clown Cried.
The Day the Clown Cried. Is there a holy grail out there for you that you have not seen or maybe have seen but don't have a copy of that you would consider your holy grail?
There's probably a couple. I think that when I used to go to Cinecon and Cinefest, which were the two film festivals for collectors of really rare films of the 1920s and 30s primarily. Well, Cinefest was held in Syracuse, New York. Cinecon is held in Los Angeles. And I saw a movie from the early 20s with the matinee idol Ivor Novello, who's probably most known today for being in Hitchcock's The Lodger. It was called The Constant Nymph. It's based on a popular novel of the time. It's been made into a movie, I'd say, I don't know, several times. This has been the subject of a feature. And I don't know what it was about that day. I may have seen it with Mike Schultz, but it was just it had a great score because the score is being performed live. And I remember it being really magical and it stuck with me. It just really, it just kind of, it never left my imagination, and it's not available. It's a film that was shown on a print that one of the collectors had brought, or that was made through an arrangement with Kodak. So that one is one that I've mentioned to other cinephiles like Dan Hassoun, saying you probably want to try, and if you ever get a chance to see this movie, I think you'd really like it. So that was one holy grail movie. The other one, of course, is maybe like The Day the Clown Cried, one that many cinephiles want to see, and that's London After Midnight, the Lon Chaney movie where he plays that like incredibly memorable looking vampire with the just rows that got shark teeth, just jagged teeth all through his mouth. And in fact, an inspiration for the look of the Babadook was that character. And that film played theatrically. Ray Bradbury saw it when he was a kid, and he talked about it, remembered it years later. But yet nobody's been able to find a print of this thing. And so the best we have is a book that was published that had the script and then all the photos, the still photos that had been taken on set. And I have a copy of that book. It was one that, collectors still to this day want to find really badly. Those are my two answers.
Those are great answers. There's going to be a lot of Googling after this episode is done.
Look up the image of Lon Chaney in London After Midnight. That's good. That's a good image.
So the last thing I want to ask you, Greg, is a little bit of a loaded question. So take it how you want.
All right.
But somebody out there who's listening to this and says, "Gosh, they've talked about some stuff, but I don't really enjoy. I don't really enjoy like artsy films, and I don't enjoy sci-fi. I just like movies that I like."
Yeah.
Right. When they approach a movie, and they're the type of person who maybe sees 2 or 3 movies a year, right? And they say, "How can you just sit in a theater all the time?
Mhm.
You're not. It's such a. It's not a group thing. It's very. It can be very lonely at times. Why don't you get involved with something else?"
Well, I mean, I think my nature as an introvert means that seeing a movie by myself in a theater is a great time, because I'm able. That's how I experience the world, is through, and I figured that out when I was really, really little, and especially watching, for instance, foreign language films. Watching movies that are made in outside of the Hollywood system, made for cinemas of countries around the world, and I would think, I wouldn't necessarily think, well, that's what, China must be like. A Zhang Yimou film is not necessarily that's what China is, but it was just like I got a glimpse into his version of something. So I don't, I think when I talk to students who are really excited about movies, it's not my job. I never want to feel like it's my job to rain on anyone's parade. There's always each generation will have its film that they love, and I don't love. Like The Boondock Saints would be a good one from a not currently the hot film among college students, but for a long time it was.
Every dorm room
with the poster, and every incoming class I would always ask on one of the exercises we do on the first day. And now, of course, I use social media to do it. We have a private Facebook group, and everyone will just post their favorite movie or movie they love so much they've watched over and over and over, and then just to say why they love it. And I am not. Yes, I like all different kinds of movies, including artsy, pretentious movies. But people will choose their. Billy Madison's going to show up on there a lot, and that's funny. I laughed. There's nothing wrong with people who pick. The beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I think. When it comes to, and also I used to quote this I probably every Trollwood class I ever had, I would say, de gustibus non disputandum, right? The taste is indisputable. There's no accounting for taste, which is why if someone would, I didn't want to make someone feel bad if I didn't like, I had to hide. Remember when The Phantom Menace came out, I sort of had to be like, yeah.
That was the summer. That was the summer that I first took Greg's class at Trollwood. And, I specifically remember him going, yeah, oh yeah, awesome.
Right.
I love it.
There
that
was
lightsaber fight was great.
There was a lot of excitement among the class, and people were talking about it. And I thought, this would be, if I was really going to lay it out there, it would be kind of mean. And so it wasn't, again, I just didn't feel like it was my job.
It's hard to have conversations about movies, though, that people love.
Be.
It really is, because if you go to someone and say, hey, I love this movie, you should watch it, and then they don't like it, oftentimes the response is, what, do you think I was wrong? Do you think I'm wrong about the taste of this movie? Or what? It becomes a hot topic.
It can, yeah. I mean, especially like with a close friend, Mike Schultz and I have a particular way about discussing movies with each other, because when we are apart on a movie, it can get really, really heated and intense. So we as we've gotten older, because we've been watching movies together since the sleepover when I was in 6th grade, when we watched the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller, Eraserhead, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. That was the three movies he rented from Videoland when you had to rent the player. What a great pick that was, and in setting us on our pathway. But if we're far apart, we know, let's agree to disagree on some stuff and walk away, so that we're not at each other's throats.
Tucker, outside of even just discussing movies, will constantly reference the fact that I enjoy Captain Ron so much.
Yeah.
And
Which stemmed from an argument over a movie.
Uh-huh.
But he'll bring it into stuff like, he'll say, well, I should go get, or I'll say you should go get your oil change. Well, yeah, but you liked Captain Ron. It doesn't matter.
It's beautiful as a catch-all dismissal
It
of
is.
anything JJ is saying specific in the moment.
Mhm.
It's become a running gag for us, Captain Ron, because we talked about this in a previous podcast, but we had both seen Lady in the Water together that night. and by M. Night Shyamalan, and then went to Applebee's and had a very big disagreement on whether the movie was good.
Yeah.
And it got so pitched to a point that I insulted him by saying,
Whoa.
you like Captain Ron, to say your opinion doesn't matter because you like that movie. Even though I have no strong opinion about the movie myself.
You'll be happy to know that I just watched that again not too long ago, and I thought, what was I thinking at the time? I think I loved Paul Giamatti so much that I was like, well, there's no way it could be that bad because Paul Giamatti's making good choices. Like Sideways.
Yeah.
But Captain Ron's the movie I have on my phone right now. I watch it whenever I'm on a flight, and without a doubt, someone will lean forward and go, what are you watching there? And be like, oh, it's a Kurt Russell opus.
Yeah.
I actually recently was on a flight, I think last year, where when they come on the intercom to introduce everyone, like the captain, the attendant literally did this. She said, "Today your captain is Captain Ron." And the whole plane laughed. Like everyone got the joke. And I had to tell JJ immediately after I got off the plane. It was the first thing I did. I got out of the gate and I called JJ and said, dude, I was just flown by Captain Ron. It was awesome. It's a good pilot.
I'm glad that he could do that. I'm always waiting for a Captain Ron sequel to come out. I don't know if they'll make it, but there's got to be meat on that
Admiral
bone.
Ron.
Sure, or I don't need to get too much in the film, but now that Cuba is open game for us again, that really there's a lot they can do with it.
Could be a Pirates of the Caribbean crossover film.
They make a big joke about that. You got to watch out for the Pirates of the Caribbean. Been to Disney World one too many times, Captain Ron. Been to Dolly World. See, I can quote the whole movie, start to finish. In fact, one year I wanted to go as Captain Ron for Halloween until my girlfriend said, nobody is going to know who the heck you are. And you're going to have to, the whole night, you'll have to explain who you are. And you're going to get frustrated and you're going to get angry at people for not knowing more about Captain Ron. So, well, Greg, thank you very much for coming on the show.
It was an absolute joy and pleasure.
Well, we want to get you on again in the not-too-distant future, and maybe I'll even let you pick genres next time that you think people need to appreciate.
We barely scratched the surface.
JJ Meets World.
Well, folks, that's going to wrap it up for today's show. For more information, including how you can help us keep the lights on by donating to our Patreon account, visit the website, www.jjmeetsworld.com, or you can hit us up on social media. We've got a Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the sites that kids are using these days. And if you'd like to stay up to date on new episodes of JJ Meets World, don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcast that you love. And hey, by the way, if you're on iTunes, send us a review, a good review. It really goes a long way for us. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by checking out www.moonbasemaria.com. And you can check out more of my work at www.linebenders.com. I've had not one but several dreams where I'm married to Angela Lansbury, and we're incredibly happy in all of them.